Our session today is all about digital capacity, digital literacy, particularly around staff. Obviously that then, to some degree also affects students, but we're mostly targeting staff capacity today, which is something that I'm sure is quite pertinent to most of us in a tell and support kind of role, in terms of how do we assist staff in gaining skills and how do we navigate those spaces in terms of ensuring that staff are confident in using technologies for teaching and learning. Oriel's the academic manager at New Zealand Tertiary College. Her background is in staff development, using technology to support teaching and learning and educational leadership. She's a fellow of the New Zealand Association for Educational Administration and Leadership, and a winner of a New Zealand National Tertiary Teaching Excellence Award. Her research interests include learning technology, online communities, and the New Zealand e-learning guidelines, and she's been teaching online for over 15 years. And introduce Oriel, who received the introduction right at the start. Oriel Kelly, academic manager for New Zealand Tertiary College, who's here to discuss increasing digital literacy for staff and students in preparation for technology-supported teaching and learning. So thank you. Can everybody join with me in thanking Naomi for her presentation while we set up for Oriel's presentation? Great, thank you. Oh, thank you, whoever just changed the slides on me. Great. So thanks, Oriel. Oriel's not only the academic manager for New Zealand Tertiary College, but also a fellow of the New Zealand Association for Educational Administration and Leadership, and is a winner of the New Zealand National Tertiary Teaching Excellence Award. So I might let you continue your introduction, Oriel, so that we don't run out of time. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, sorry, I knew I shouldn't have told you all that because you're going to read it. Hi guys, sorry I was late. I got pesky students, you know what they're like. So what I'm going to share is actually two projects in the end that we were doing. The first one is our digital information literacy project, but I suddenly realized that we actually implemented some of this in a blended learning project as well. And it kind of ties in with the sorts of things that the other two presenters have been talking about. Like, I'll get to those. Okay, so I'll get through these fairly fast. So we tried to define digital information literacy, and that's what we came up with. And that was quite a few years ago now, but that was what it meant then, to be able to access and use and create and share. But what was more interesting was our looking at the capabilities and the dispositions. And we wanted to know if they would experiment or play and go with trial and error when they were finding a new tool that they were using. Now, this is before Twitter, so the tools that they were using were the pretty standard ones. They were the LMS, they were iPads, they were some kind of digital recording of anything. Even a basic camera came into the technology that they hadn't had a chance to play with. Could they be self-directed, and would they consult others about their own ignorance and help each other out? So that was kind of the basis of the research. I think you've had the links to the actual things shared with you, so I can skip over that quite quickly. So what we did was we came up with some taxonomies that we wanted to run by them before and after. So we had the digital information literacy one, but we also had the ICT one. So did they have confidence in their own ability? Could they problem solve? Were they motivated in having persistence, resilience? Were they sharing and collaborating? And we also suggested they set up a personal, what is it, PI something or other? Would they get on? And we wanted them to do some blogging, essentially. Were they going to be reflective? What were their technical terminology and other things like that and what did they believe about the ICT and whether it would help them in their job? So you can have a look at what we did. Those were the people that were involved. As you can see, we had a couple of TAFEs, and we also had a couple of universities. So we had a wide spectrum of people that we were trying to get to take part in being a bit more, I guess, experimental with some tools. So those, as I said, they were pretty basic tools. That it was 2010. You can imagine we're going back a bit when blogging was really quite new. I think Facebook was so new nobody used it. No one had heard of LinkedIn in those days. So they were even the basic ones that we wanted people to use. So what we found though, and I think this moves forward 7 to 10 years, if they were in an environment that was collaborative and supported, then it worked. So we set up kind of like workshops where they could come along and play with the tool and see what it did, how it worked, get some help. We had a mixed group of lecturers and students in there. The students tended to have better skills than the lecturers did. But the fact that there was somebody there, there was techies there to help them out to improve their skills, they actually made quite a lot of difference to their confidence and what they were able to do. And in that was the fact that they actually met face to face, because we had people who came in using one tool, were going to do this with their time that they had set aside, saw 2 other people using a different one, dropped their tool, went on to do something else. They actually messed about and completely changed what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. So they were exploring and experimenting with things. And the key thing, I think you just mentioned it, Naomi, about play. They were allowed to play. And so they played with each other's toys, and they played with new toys because they were exploring and experimenting with it. So what we ended up building there was a fairly tight learning community, which spread out into a community of practice, because they were helping each other, they were going to each other for mentoring, and they were actually getting a lot further along than they thought they were going to with the tools that they were using. Some of it's there. What we then decided to implement was a blended learning project, which was pull them all out of their faculties, get them together. We actually set up a credit-bearing course that was part of their professional development so that they would get some credit for what they were doing, so there was something in it for them. And we got sanction from the individual academics saying, yes, I'll take part in this because I'll get a piece of paper at the end of it. But the whole faculty was behind it in the sense that, well, this is what we want to achieve. So it was a very clear goal that we were shifting this course into this blended delivery mode, and this is how we're going to do it. And we could then put the carpenters, for example, in with the catering and hospitality people, who were completely different animals and were therefore talking about different tools, but their enthusiasm would wear off or on the other people. So we actually got carpenters talking about, well, maybe there's a better way to show this if we did this in an animation, those sorts of things. So the blended learning project was quite large in terms of getting a lot of buy-in from a lot of people, but they were in a position where, again, they could play and experiment and get some technical help. So what we learnt from that was that, yeah, some of them couldn't even use Blackboard and couldn't see any point in using Blackboard, so that had to be sensitively dealt with. There was a focus on the outcomes for the student rather than the tool itself. So you can't just say this is a great tool if you don't have a reason for using it. It was project based, so the staff member became a student and they got something out of it. This was a course in their Certificate of Adult Teaching, or even a higher course, that got them some credit and got them something on their appraisal and got them something for putting towards maybe their CMOLT or something that came up later. What we did find though was you get so carried away with the playing and the tool that they really have to understand what are the students getting out of this and what assessment is going to be in line with this. How do you know that they've achieved it? And they got quite carried away. Oh, our vehicle technology students could film what they're doing in the workshop and send it in to us. Okay, how are you going to mark that? How are you going to get it? All that sort of thing you've got to keep track of. What we also found was individual projects were good, but group projects were better, especially if you want to get a real step change in what they do. If you really want them to all heading in the same direction, then you get them to work together and push them, and then they get a bit more impetus that way. They also need that big picture. They have to know where, and some people we discovered don't. They don't know where their little course that they're so wedded to actually fits in terms of the outcomes that the Institute wants for graduates, or even where their little course fits in the whole program in terms of the graduate profile, or where everything fits with where the Institute is heading as well. So that was the kind of basis in a nutshell, because we're running out of time, for those two projects, and we kind of wrote them up. But I've been a staff developer now for about 20 years, and I don't think human nature's changed much. So even though we're talking 7 years ago with some of this stuff, I don't think the lessons should be dismissed really quickly, because I think if you're going to make some change, that's one of the good ways to do it. Okay, so questions or comments, or I guess it comes down to, yes, they need to feel the fear, but they need to do it anyway. But one of the ways to get around that fear is to give them some time set aside that is sanctioned to actually play with stuff.
Thank you so much, Oriel. That was terrific. You just mentioned time and having sanctioned time. How important do you think it is to either organise or encourage people to set aside regular habitual time that they've blocked out and have it, dedicated where it's not necessarily, where it's, I guess, a bit more formalised, or at least blocked in terms of a calendar, so that people are making that time?
Yeah, that was because it was sanctioned by the whole institute. So they weren't playing, they were actually attending a course or taking part in sanctioned research. So it looked to the bigwigs as though they were actually getting something valuable out of it. But what tended to happen was that they got a chance to play, and people decided, like we had one early childhood teacher, for instance, who wanted to record what her students that she visited out on practicum were doing. She started off with a camera, she ended up with an iPad, and then she found some other way of recording it and sitting down with the student and then deleting it immediately afterwards because of privacy issues. But she wouldn't have made that step change if she hadn't had a chance to get familiar with the technology. But the trick was her manager knew that she was studying something, and it was the way the institute wanted to go, it was the way the department wanted to go.
Great. Sue Tucker asks, how did you get manager, supervisor buy-in for staff to participate?
Well, we set it up as a research project, so they were sanctioned, but we also, as I said, tied it into a professional development qualification. Because when we got to the blended learning project, there was an actual course around it, which carried about 15, 20 credits or something, and they had to produce something at the end that was a product that was marked. So even though they came along to class, they came along every Wednesday from 5 till 9, or I think it was 5 till 8, and we showed them something, but then we gave them something to play with. So because it had a payoff for the institute, they were allowed to.
There's a couple of questions from Caroline and Chia that are sort of semi-related. So Caroline's asking, is the COP still in place? And Chia's asking, did academics get to share their stories of what didn't work as part of those conversations?
Yeah, well, that was half the fun of playing. What didn't work and why didn't it work? So they were actually confessing their ignorance and laughing at themselves because their confidence grew and they knew they didn't need to know everything. I think a lot of academics won't do something because they think they've got to be an expert in it. But once they're in a position where it's okay to play and it's okay to stuff up and it's okay to make mistakes and the techies won't laugh at you if you don't know how to turn on Blackboard, then that was the safe environment. Did it continue? Don't know. Left. My next project was going to work with the business school to get them doing it, but I left the place, so I have no idea whether it carried on or not. Some of my friends still talk about it, but I don't know if that's actually still happening. I know the qualification is still there, so I hope it still is. It was at a previous institution.
I guess I'll ask one more quick one and just open up to anybody else in the last few minutes. I guess how important, and it can be for everyone as well, I guess how important do you and other people feel it is in terms of tying it to some sort of credit or recognition or partial credit towards something that people can demonstrate or gain qualifications from?
Well, I mean, it was mentioned before, if you the blogging didn't happen because they weren't going to get any output from it. In tapes, I think it's a little easier to tie it to something. I guess if they can write it up and publish it, that's fine. There's got to be something in it for them. So if something in it for them turns out to be, I'm a bit more confident with using Twitter, and I can see a reason for it, and I can use it in my classroom, then, and the way I get on with my students because it meets one of our learning outcomes or it enables something, then there's something in it for them if they want to be a good teacher, I guess. Was the course compulsory? In one department, yes, everybody had to be signed up. In another department, it wasn't, but they came anyway because word spread. And the research, oh yeah, that was fun. I forgot, yeah. The research was they were allowed to choose a tool to the value of something like $300 or something, so it was funded. So they actually got something tangible out of it.
Great. Well, I might just open it up more widely in the last minute or two that we have. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to take the mic. And thank you so much, Oriel, for presenting to us today.
Ah, you're welcome. I'm sorry I got stuck, but I'm here now.
I guess it's probably more of a comment than a question. And it seems to be a recurring theme across all of the presentations, which is that when we focus on the technology for the sake of having the technology or for the sake of, you know, sort of integrating with particular systems or whatever, it's pretty apparent that it just doesn't do what people need it to do. So always emphasizing what it is that we're trying to do, you know, putting the technology in the background and just looking at what it is that we're actually trying to do, and then finding what tool will enable us to actually do that seems to be just where we need to go.
I'd agree with that. I think I put something up. You start with a purpose and you go from there. So I think a friend of mine, Richard Elliott, always used to say that it's learning in the driving seat, not technology. That just turns the wheels. And I think he's right. You've got to have a reason for people to actually want to play with this stuff or for people to actually want to start using it. Like Twitter, for example. Okay, I'll load up. I only tweet if I'm sitting in a conference. That's the only time I've ever turned up on Twitter because I cannot see why anybody would be interested in anything I've got to say any other time. I can't see a purpose for it. I am on LinkedIn and I am on Facebook, but Twitter, no, I haven't actually got a purpose for it. So, yeah, that's me.
Well, I think it sounds like it's naturally wrapping up. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and all of our presenters. I know that Caroline's just left, but thank you to Naomi and Oriel for presenting today, and thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully you can keep the conversation going through Moodle, and if not through Moodle, there's also Twitter, which despite Oriel just suggesting she doesn't have a purpose, hopefully some of you who do have a purpose are keeping that conversation going through there. And yeah, also just look forward to next month. If you have any suggestions for topics or presenters, please post them in the Moodle space. And thanks again, everyone.